I've got two voices in my head, in addition to my own. My own is in there sometimes too. One of those voices is from a woman I lived with for 18 years. And then she was influential in my life until finally I took care of her and she died. And she's quoting the Proverbs and all kinds of stuff to me in my head all the time. The other of those voices is of a woman that I started living with when I was 19, and I'm still living with. That's a total of 43 years. And her voice is the one always in my head saying, be kind, be loving, be compassionate, be good to people, be gentle, use good judgment in what you say, and so many other good things. So many of you have been a blessing in my life that are women of God, and today we're going to talk about the powerful influence of women. You know, Eve gets a bad rap. She's the one, obviously, that was tempted and gave the fruit to her husband, and then, the whole world messed up there. But, she raised two really good boys. She raised Abel and Seth, and they called upon the name of the Lord, and she has lots of good in her. Deborah, the judge of Israel that JV read us about, it was a dark time in Israel's history. The men of Israel had no backbone. They had no leadership. They had no courage. And Deborah arose, a mother in Israel, trusting in the Lord. And she put courage in their weak hearts, and she put some steel in their backbones. And she led them to trust the Lord and deliver Israel. And then in one of the worst times of Israel's history, at the end of the book of Judges, when it says every man just did what was right in his own eyes, there was a woman, a godly woman, a praying woman, who was humbly praying to God for a child. And she knew that God was the answer to Israel's problems. And she gave them, through her faith and her commitment, the best leader that Israel had had in many generations, and his name was Samuel. There was Naomi, the mother-in-law of Ruth. And you remember the story of the love between those women, and how one said to the other, wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your God shall be my God. Your people shall be my people. And there was a wonderful relationship that was a blessing to both. And then, there was that guy Samson, who was supposed to be one of the judges, the deliverers of Israel. And there was that manipulative, wily woman, Delilah, that got the man a haircut and brought him down and ended up being his ruin. So sometimes women are not just good influences, they're the worst nightmare you have in your life. I was sitting across a glass in the jail this week, visiting with a woman about 40 or so, tears streaming down her face, and the memories of a very bad mother, and one of the reasons she is where she is today. Then there was good old Jezebel, who led Ahab, king of Israel, around by his nose. She was a proponent of idolatry and evil influence and was the downfall of Israel. And then there was a sweet lady named Abigail, who had a churlish, mean, nasty, ill-tempered husband named Nabal. But Abigail, by her kindness and graciousness, not only helped avoid a war, but made up for a lot of her husband's rudeness and cruelty and ugliness. And a lot of us have had that favor rendered to us many times. Then there was Lydia, the businesswoman, who was a seller of purple, who was in Philippi when Paul arrived, who was open to the gospel and became a leader in the church at Philippi. Then there was Priscilla, who worked with her husband, Aquila, making tents. And they opened their home to the church, and they risked their necks for Paul and many others, a great woman of faith. There was Phoebe, the servant / minister / deaconess, however you want to translate that, of the church at Cenchrea, who was so respected by Paul, who had served many, who was a great helper in the church, and had had a tremendous influence on a lot of people. Then there was merciful Dorcas, who loved the widows quietly and cared for the widows, and they loved her. And how many women who were lonely and desperate did she bless and help through her quiet service in the background? You always, when you preach a sermon like this, you have to go to Google and do some research. So I Googled this week, and I was Googling the influence of women. And it was a statistical study done on predictable outcomes in the lives of children and how much influence the different parental figures had. By far, statistically, the greatest influence on the children came from the mothers. The mother's influence was the biggest determiner of later political and religious commitments in life, things that people would commit their lives to. I found that very, very interesting. Then I got to thinking, well, surely in a Mother's Day sermon, we need some country songs that talk about mamas. And then old Merle Haggard came to the rescue. I turned 21 in prison doing life without parole. No one could steer me right, but Mama tried. Mama tried to raise me better, but her pleading I denied. That leaves only me to blame, because Mama tried. Faith Hill, to her, a mother to a daughter, you can't lose me. Bet your life I am here, and I'll always be. And then, of course, and I was prohibited from singing this, mamas, don't let your babies grow up to be cowboys. Don't let them pick guitars and drive them old trucks. Make them be doctors and lawyers and such. And then, of course, Mr. Cole's perfect country song, I was drunk the day my mom got out of prison, Well, there are women that have tremendous influence for good in our lives, and there are women that have the worst nightmare kind of influence in our lives. We are blessed today by the wonderful women that bless us in God's influence in our lives. I've got several examples for you this morning. First of all, on your outline, the example of Mary. Ladies, you don't have to be Mary, the mother of Jesus, to be a mother. Because if I read the book, I don't know of any more seemingly perfect woman than Mary, the mother of Jesus, and we're not all perfect. In Luke chapter 1, verse 28, the angel comes to Mary and he says, "Greetings, Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with you." That must have been one beautiful, spirited young lady. In Luke chapter 1, verse 30, the angel says to her, "You have found favor with God." She must have had a sincere heart. She must have had a deep desire to do the will of the Lord. When God explained this predicament she was in and what he was going to ask of her, think of a society like Afghanistan today. That's how the ancient Near East was to some degree with women in the time of Mary. And she's being asked to have a child without benefit of a husband by miracle so that the Son of God can come into the world. And in Luke chapter 1 and verse 38, she just simply said, "I am the Lord's servant. Let it be done unto me according to your word." Now that is a humble, submissive, willing to sacrifice everything woman. At age 12, little boy Jesus, he goes missing for 3 days, and frantically Mary is searching all over Jerusalem trying to find him, and she finds him 3 days later in the temple. And you can imagine how stressed and how worried and how messed up she was mentally. And she said to Jesus, "Son, why have you treated us this way?" And Jesus looked up from his discussion with the teachers of the law and said, "Do you not know that I must be about my Father's business?" Bless her heart. Bless her heart. And she went home and took him home to Nazareth, and he began his ministry, and she followed him around the country, and sometimes he didn't have much time for her. Once her his brothers and his mother Mary came to see about Jesus, and he was busy teaching people, and somebody said, "Master, your mother and your brothers are outside." And Jesus said to the crowd, "Who is my mother and who are my brothers? But those who seek to do the will of the Father." Now, I'm sure he visited with her, but she didn't have front place in his life a lot of times, but she was a good mother. When everybody left, when Jesus was arrested, when he had gone to the cross, when he was deserted by his disciples, John was left, and there at the foot of a cross was, guess who? His mother. The woman who had given everything for Jesus, not afraid. She encouraged her son through the stress and the suffering of the cross. And Jesus looked down at the disciple whom he had loved, and he said, "This is now your mother. And Mom, this is now your son." After the resurrection in Acts chapter 1, verse 12, when Jesus ascended into the heavens and the disciples waited on the coming of the Holy Spirit, the Bible says that Mary, the mother of Jesus, was one of those that was there and one of the first disciples with his brothers in the church that began on the day of Pentecost. Mary, a wonderful woman, a great example for all of us, the example of Mary. Number 2, sincere faith of Lois and Eunice. You know, there's some women that are just real. There's nothing like a very real, sincere, transparent, good woman. And Timothy's mother and grandmother must have been that way. In 2 Timothy 1, verse 5, the Apostle Paul loved Timothy. He loved that young man. And he said, "I am reminded of your sincere faith, which lived first in your grandmother, Lois, and then in your mother Eunice, and I am persuaded it lives in you also." Why did Paul love Timothy so much? Because he could watch him day after day. He could see him in different situations. He could watch how he was trying. He wasn't just getting work done or doing a job or trying to get out. He was dedicated. He was sincere. He was really committed. It wasn't fake. It was real down to his core. And Paul loved him for that more than anybody else. In Philippians chapter 1, verse 20, Paul said of Timothy, "I have no other person that has the same kind of attitude other than Timothy, because they all seek their own stuff and not the things of Jesus Christ." But where did Timothy get that attitude? From the sincere faith of a grandmother and a mother. Oh, we've got some grandmothers in this church who have been such a tremendous blessing in the lives of their grandchildren. And their grandchildren are faithful Christians today because of their grandmothers. My father's family had 9 children in it. And many of those children were faithful Christians for the rest of their days. It wasn't because of their daddy, I'll guarantee you. It was because of a quiet, godly, loving mother who loved God, and they knew it, and she was sincere from the beginning. Sincere faith. I've seen it in so many of you. Don't ever underestimate how powerful that is. You don't show sincere faith in some one-time public act. Your children see it. They feel it, they smell it, they look at it, they watch it day after day. It matters more than any one thing you say or do. That's what they'll remember for the rest of their life. Number 3 today. This is kind of a weird one. The persistence and obedience of the woman in Revelation 12. Men, when God pictured the people of God in a symbol, when he pictured the faithful people of the ages in a symbol, he didn't pick a man. He picked that beautiful woman of Revelation 12. And that beautiful woman that pictures the faithful people of God, she's pregnant with a child. She bears the child. He's talking about the Christ child. And the dragon, Satan, in Revelation 12, is right there persecuting that woman. He wants to devour that child, and that woman is wanting to protect that child. See? You know, the devil, if he wants to attack ground zero of the faithful, he's going to attack the good women of the faith, because the most powerful thing God has is the good women that try to do right and teach their children right. Well, in Revelation chapter 12, the dragon fails to destroy the child. The woman has the baby. The child, which is Jesus, is caught up to heaven. And then that dragon just gets after that woman and keeps trying to destroy that woman. And if you read down through the chapter, everything that he does, he tries to destroy that woman, and he can't end up destroying her. Now, here's where I'm going with this. In Revelation 12, verse 17, when the dragon saw that he couldn't destroy the woman, he got very, very angry. Now, listen. And he went away to make war on her offspring, the woman's children. Listen. Those who keep God's commands and hold the testimony of Jesus. Now, those who keep God's commands. There are women who really care about keeping God's commands. They talk to their children every day about doing right, about doing what God says, about doing what the Bible says. As their children grow, they watch their mothers or grandmother seeking with great commitment to try to do God's commands. And they grow up and keep God's commands because their mothers showed them how important that was to keep God's commands. Many of you in this room are serving God today because of a woman in your life that taught you it was important to keep the commandments of God. Keep, that's a good word that comes from good mothers. Hold to the testimony of Jesus. Those are good words that come from good mothers. Number 4, and this is a good one. The abundant love of Rufus's mother. Who in the world was Rufus? Y'all all know that guy, don't you? Say, I don't know. I am. In Romans 16, verse 13, Paul is greeting a guy that was a friend of his. He says, greet Rufus, chosen in the Lord, and his mom, who has been a mother to me also. You know, guys, we're supposed to grow up. Young ladies, we're supposed to grow up, and then we're not supposed to need mothers. But I'm telling you today that I thank God for so many women in my life who have been mothers to me other than my mother. When I first began preaching, in a little Mississippi town, there was an old red-headed lady in her 80s named Ruth Hanson, and she was a mother to my wife and to me. There was a preacher's wife named Donna Marshall who took us into her home when we were 19 and we were married, and she mothered us, and she was a blessing. There was an old farmer's wife by the name of Mildred Eversole in the metropolis of St. Louis, Oklahoma, that took us into her home time and time again and fed us and loved us and mothered us when we were trying to be a young preacher and his wife. There was Aunt Billy Owen, my aunt, who mothered me for several years as a young preacher, and I'll never forget her influence. There was an old woman who wrote the song, Into Our Hands the Gospel is Given. Her name was Ruth Caruth, and she was beautiful and elegant and godly and dignified, and she impressed my life, as did an old school teacher who was in her 90s by the name of Isla Clark, who loved the Bible and encouraged me to study it and teach it. My good friend Denny Petrillo's mother, Neva Petrillo, mothered me and fed me roast potatoes and gravy for I don't know how many times, and she blessed my life immensely. Mary Beth Washam has been a great blessing to my life. Irma Davis. Marilyn Simpson, who is back there in the nursery and ought to be inaugurated into sainthood for all she's done for our children. Hugs my neck and still is a mother to me in Israel. And many others of you do the same kind of thing. This list goes on. Those mothers who are like Rufus's mother, who had enough love to overflow not just to good old Rufus, her son, but to Paul. She blessed his life like many of you have blessed mine and others in here. Folks, we need those mothers like Rufus's mother who can be mothers to all of us, and we're grateful for them. Number 5, the ministry of Phoebe. Phoebe, Romans 16. Paul writes, this is unusual. I commend to you our sister, Phoebe, a diakonos, a servant, a minister of the church at Cenchrea. I ask you to receive her in the Lord in a manner worthy of saints. He wanted them to treat this woman very well and to give her any help that she might need. Why, Paul? For she has been a great help to many people, including me. I tell you today, and you know this, the work, the ministries of this church would be nothing without the women who serve and do and are kind and offer service and do the things that are the day-to-day working of the church. This woman had been a servant, a helper of many. Many of you sitting in the audience have been servants and helpers of many. And what that does is that builds credibility, spiritual credibility. That builds respect when people see you quietly doing the will of the Lord. People look up to you. People follow that spiritual leadership, and that leadership is powerful in the lives of young men and women and others everywhere. I am thankful in my life for women like Mary who are committed and humble and open. I am thankful for the sincere faith of women like Lois and Eunice. I'm thankful for the persistence and obedience of those women that emphasize to their children to keep God's commandments, like the woman in Revelation 12. I'm thankful for those women like Rufus's mom that have enough love, not just for their own kids, but for some of the rest of us. They give us self-esteem and confidence and reassurance. And I'm thankful for those servant women like Phoebe who earn credibility and lead many in the ways of God. Where would we be without those women? Now, in just a minute, when we stand and sing, remember, those of you young mothers who have had babies this year, we want you to come down and the elders are going to pray over you. But no Mother's Day sermon would be complete without a guess what? A poem. So here you go. This poem is called Mother. She's wrinkled now. Her once smooth skin remembers when we nestled close and cuddled tenderly at 2 or 3 or 7. She's cleaning now, recalling days we crawled upon her floors and slammed her doors as she toiled within the kitchen. She's cooking now, with bony hands for herself and a white-haired man, recalling countless meals she made when gathered round her table laid with food, we prayed and talked of daily family things. She's rocking now, recalling when she rocked us slowly, closely, holding tight and patting out our fears, our tears, our sorrows, and gave us strength for our tomorrows. She's lonely now. Her furrowed brow considers times when blonde babes and bright-eyed kindergartners were her daily partners. She's praying now in quietness, naming our names before his throne, as countless days and years she's done, that God might bless us, every one. She's reading now, with glasses on her nose, God's book, which in our hearts still grows, because she put it there so many years ago. She's lying down to sleep at last, unconscious how her fleeting past has formed and shaped the lives we live and colored things yet future. And I, her long-gone middle son, wearied with the setting sun and resting 'neath the peaceful moon, remind myself to call her soon. If you're one of those mothers that's just had babies, please come as together we stand and sing.